Suddenly thought of Brenda Hatfield, Queen of the 5th grade. Now, I's gonna be an amusing little portrait, perhaps tender of, this little guy. And when I finished, then I realized, oh, okay, but I'm sophisticated, I'm a graduate student, so it's really a comment upon gender stereotypes. Here I am, wearing the bow tie and marching down, and I am escorting and leading, in full command of the queen, who's all flowery, and the ridiculousness of that will be revealed by my little memory. So then I applied intentionality. Well, anyway, I'll get to the reason. I don't think that's what the poem was about later, but here's the point. Because you left me a handful of daffodils, I suddenly thought of Brenda Hatfield, Queen of the 5th grade, Concord Elementary. A very thin, shy girl, almost as tall as Audrey Hepburn, but blonde. She wore a dress based upon the principle of the daffodil. Puffed sleeves, inflated bodice, profusion of frills along the shoulder blades and hemline. A dress based upon the principle of girl as flower. Everything unfolding, spilling outward and downward, ribbon, stole, corsage, sash. It was the only thing I was ever elected, a very short king. I wore a bow tie and felt like a 3rd grader. Even the scent of the daffodils you left reminded me. It was a spring night, and escorting her down the runway was a losing battle. Trying to march down among the full, thick folds of crinoline, into the barrage of her father's flash bulbs, wading the backwash of her mother's perfume, scared, smiling, tiny, down at the end of that long, thin Audrey Hepburn arm, where I was king. The saddest part of that poem to me is feeling like a 3rd grader. When you're a 5th grader, that's not good. But the other part is, I realized after I'd written the poem and published the poem and published the book, that the poem was about the relationship I was in at the moment. The woman who gave me the flowers. And the other part, that's not relevant to anyone else, but it's relevant to me, and the reason you write a poem it allows you to discover things that maybe you need to understand or need to express. I think that poetry, there's a huge crowd here. It's a great crowd. But on any given night, this many people are entering the doors of Potawatomi Bingo, at any given moment. So it's not, comparatively, it's not. But I think that poetry has its hooks in a lot more brains and hearts than we think sometimes. And if it's not, being recited beautifully, if it's not being lined up in lines in the book, it's still, anyone who's been to a funeral or a marriage or a baptism or a memorial service or has snatches of lyrics in their head, anyone who's ever felt something that they knew they weren't conveying completely to someone else, anyone who's ever felt there's a part of herself or himself that is essential and important, and yet the person next to them, maybe the person next to them for years and years, doesn't really even know that person. And I think that it's rare that you'll find a person who hasn't felt that kind of poetry tugging at them. That if they could put into words what they feel and who they are and what they fear and what they celebrate, and in words that matter, in words that would last, as Ezra Pound said about literature, it's news that stays news. But if they could do that, then that would be a good thing. They would be more fully known. They would be more fully understood as a self. And so I think even people who don't write or even jot things down by themselves, but I think if you feel that gap ever between who you are and what you think and then what you're able to convey in sort of your daily chatter, then I think you know what poetry is and you know what it's for. And sometimes even if you don't do it, which I think many more people do than we know, than And then, but even if you don't, sometimes if you hear someone, or if you read it, or even in a good conversation, if you hear someone put something in some way, and you think, wow, that's like poetry, what you just said. I mean, what you mean is, I've never heard that said better. What you mean is, there's an awful lot that language can still do. Even as inundated as we are, as bombarded as we are, with bits and bytes and, you know, all of the images that are trying to get our attention in our pockets and backpacks right now. There is a kind of seductive power to that may make us think that somehow we are more connected. And it might even be that poetry slowing down or even speeding up in a way so that you can feel the joy and celebration and abundance of language. I think it's needed more and more. I think that it's not something that is obscure or something that is strange or the property of professors or the academic world at all. It's part of what's been going on long before there were organized alphabets, long before there were printing presses. People were chanting, people were strumming, people were trying to express something central about what it means to be alive and part of the planet. That's what poetry is for, and will always be for. My job, the Poet Laureate job, is basically, probably on this, for the both of you too, is simply to invite more people to participate as writers and readers. We live in a time right now in which we are being hammered over the head with concerns about economy and jobs and balancing budgets, but you know, a balanced life is worth considering too. And part of that is acknowledging that which is within us, the spirit that keeps us human. And so I think, particularly in a state in which the state arts budget has been cut by 70% and has dropped us down to 15 cents per capita in state art support. If you live over where I live, an hour away from the Minnesota state line, it's $5.77. So they're number one, we're number 48. If you live in a state that really, I would say, is in danger. No, lots of people like people here are doing their best to make sure this doesn't happen, but is in danger of betraying the creativity and the imaginations of its young people. They don't stop making little kids who have the imagination of a Frank Lloyd Wright or a Georgia O'Keeffe or a Lorraine Niedecker or John Muir or Aldo Leopold, those sorts of people, all of whom did much of their best work here or got some of their education here. And we need to stand up for that on the state level. What I've noticed traveling around the state is that there are all of these people out there, you know, trying to keep poetry alive and art alive and the things that make our culture and our civilization more than just dollars and cents. And, you know, we may live in an occupied country, but there's a strong imaginative power. And poetry is a part of that power. The arts are a part of that power. That's why I agreed to do it, because, you know, it's a lot. It's been really hard on my car. But aside from that, I think it's very, I've been very happy to do it. I better get back.